The Seven Dials Mystery by Agatha Christie. Chapter 16. The House Party at the Abbey. Bundle drove over to Wyvern Abbey just in time for tea on Friday afternoon. George Lomax came forward to welcome her with considerable empressement. "My dear Eileen," he said, "I can't tell you how pleased I am to see you here. You must forgive my not having invited you when I asked your father, but to tell the truth I never dreamed that a party of this kind would appeal to you. I was both surprised and delighted when Lady Caterham told me of your interest in politics. I wanted to come so much," said Bundle in a simple, ingenuous manner. "Mrs. Macadam will not arrive till the later train," explained George. "She was speaking at a meeting in Manchester last night. Do you know Thesiger? Quite a young fellow, but a remarkable grasp of foreign politics. One would hardly suspect it from his appearance." "I know Mr. Thesiger," said Bundle, and she shook hands solemnly with Jimmy, whom she observed had parted his hair in the middle in the endeavor to add earnestness to his expression. "Look here," said Jimmy in a low hurried voice, as George temporarily withdrew. "You mustn't be angry, but I've told Bill about our little stunt." "Bill?" said Bundle, annoyed. "Well, after all," said Jimmy, "Bill is one of the lads, you know. Ronnie was a pal of his and so was Jerry." "Oh. I know," said Bundle. "But you think it's a pity?" "Sorry. Bill's all right, of course." "It isn't that," said Bundle. "But well, Bill's a born blunderer." "Not mentally very agile," suggested Jimmy. "But you forget one thing, Bill's got a very hefty fist. And I've an idea that a hefty fist is going to come in handy." "Well, perhaps you're right. How did he take it?" "Well, he clutched his head a good bit, but, I mean the facts took some driving home. But by repeating the thing patiently in words of one syllable I at last got it into his thick head. And, naturally, he's with us to the death, as you might say." George reappeared suddenly. "I must make some introductions, Eileen. This is Sir Stanley Digby, Lady Eileen Brent. Mr. O'Rourke." The Air Minister was a little round man with a cheerful smile. Mr. O'Rourke, a tall young man with laughing blue eyes and a typical Irish face, greeted Bundle with enthusiasm. "And I thinking it was going to be a dull political party entirely," he murmured in an adroit whisper. "Hush," said Bundle. "I'm political, very political. Sir Oswald and Lady Coote, you know," continued George. "We've never actually met," said Bundle, smiling. She was mentally applauding her father's descriptive powers. Sir Oswald took her hand in an iron grip and she winced slightly. Lady Coote, after a somewhat mournful greeting, had turned to Jimmy Thesiger, and appeared to be registering something closely akin to pleasure. Despite his reprehensible habit of being late for breakfast, Lady Coote had a fondness for this amiable, pink-faced young man. His air of irrepressible good nature fascinated her. She had a motherly wish to cure him of his bad habits and form him into one of the world's workers. Whether, once formed, he would be as attractive was a question she had never asked herself. She began now to tell him of a very painful motor accident which had happened to one of her friends. "Mr. Bateman," said George briefly, as one who would pass on to better things. A serious, pale-faced young man bowed. "And now," continued George, "I must introduce you to Countess Radsky." Countess Radsky had been conversing with Mr. Bateman. Leaning very far back on a sofa, with her legs crossed in a daring manner, she was smoking a cigarette in an incredibly long turquoise-studded holder. Bundle thought she was one of the most beautiful women she had ever seen. Her eyes were very large and blue, her hair was coal black, she had a matte skin, the slightly flattened nose of the Slav, and a sinuous, slender body. Her lips were reddened to a degree with which Bundle was sure Wyvern Abbey was totally unacquainted. She said eagerly, "This is Mrs. Macadam, yes?" On George's replying in the negative and introducing Bundle, the Countess gave her a careless nod, and at once resumed her conversation with the serious Mr. Bateman. Bundle heard Jimmy's voice in her ear. "Pongo is absolutely fascinated by the lovely Slav," he said. "Pathetic, isn't it? Come and have some tea." They drifted once more into the neighborhood of Sir Oswald Coote. "That's a fine place of yours, Chimneys," remarked the great man. "I'm glad you liked it," said Bundle meekly. "Wants new plumbing," said Sir Oswald. "Bring it up to date, you know." He ruminated for a minute or two. "I'm taking the Duke of Alton's place. 3 years. Just while I'm looking round for a place of my own. Your father couldn't sell if he wanted to, I suppose." Bundle felt her breath taken away. She had a nightmare vision of England with innumerable Cootes in innumerable counterparts of Chimneys, all, be it understood, with an entirely new system of plumbing installed. She felt a sudden violent resentment which, she told herself, was absurd. After all, contrasting Lord Caterham with Sir Oswald Coote, there was no doubt as to who would go to the wall. Sir Oswald had one of those powerful personalities which make all those with whom they come in contact appear fated. He was, as Lord Caterham had said, a human steamroller. And yet, undoubtedly, in many ways, Sir Oswald was a stupid man. Apart from his special line of knowledge and his terrific driving force, he was probably intensely ignorant. 100 delicate appreciations of life which Lord Caterham could and did enjoy were a sealed book to Sir Oswald. Whilst indulging in these reflections, Bundle continued to chat pleasantly. Her Eberhard, she heard, had arrived, but was lying down with a nervous headache. This was told her by Mr. O'Rourke, who managed to find a place by her side and keep it. Altogether, Bundle went up to dress in a pleasant mood of expectation, with a slight nervous dread hovering in the background whenever she thought of the imminent arrival of Mrs. Mackadda. Bundle felt that dalliance with Mrs. Mackadda was going to prove no primrose path. Her first shock was when she came down, demurely attired in a black lace frock, and passed along the hall. A footman was standing there, at least a man dressed as a footman. But that square, burly figure lent itself badly to the deception. Bundle stopped and stared. "Superintendent Battle," she breathed. "That's right, Lady Eileen." "Oh," said Bundle uncertainly. "Are you here to keep an eye on things?" "I see. That warning letter, you know," said the superintendent, fairly put the wind-up Mr. Lomax. "Nothing would do for him but that I should come down myself." "But don't you think," began Bundle, and stopped. She hardly liked to suggest to the superintendent that his disguise was not a particularly efficient one. He seemed to have "police officer" written all over him, and Bundle could hardly imagine the most unsuspecting criminal failing to be put on his guard. "You think," said the superintendent stolidly, "that I might be recognized?" He gave the final word a distinct capital letter. "I did think so, yes," admitted Bundle. Something that might conceivably have been intended for a smile crossed the woodenness of Superintendent Battle's features. "Put them on their guard, eh?" "Well, Lady Eileen, why not?" "Why not?" echoed Bundle, rather stupidly, she felt. Superintendent Battle was nodding his head slowly. "We don't want any unpleasantness, do we?" he said. "Don't want to be too clever, just show any light-fingered gentry that may be about, well, just show them that there's somebody on the spot, so to speak." Bundle gazed at him in some admiration. She could imagine that the sudden appearance of so renowned a personage as Superintendent Battle might have a depressing effect on any scheme and the hatchers of it. "It's a great mistake to be too clever," Superintendent Battle was repeating. "The great thing is not to have any unpleasantness this weekend." Bundle passed on, wondering how many of her fellow guests had recognized or would recognize the Scotland Yard detective. In the drawing-room George was standing with a puckered brow and an orange envelope in his hand. "Most vexatious," he said. "A telegram from Mrs. Mackadda to say she will be unable to be with us. Her children are suffering from mumps." Bundle's heart gave a throb of relief. "I especially feel this on your account, Eileen," said George kindly. "I know how anxious you were to meet her. The Countess too will be sadly disappointed." "Oh, never mind," said Bundle. "I should hate it if she'd come and given me mumps." "A very distressing complaint," agreed George. "But I do not think that infection could be carried that way. Indeed, I am sure that Mrs. Macadam would have run no risk of that kind. She is a most highly principled woman, with a very real sense of her responsibilities to the community. In these days of national stress, we must all take into account." On the brink of embarking on a speech, George pulled himself up short. "But it must be for another time," he said. "Fortunately there is no hurry in your case. But the Countess, alas, is only a visitor to our shores." "She's a Hungarian, isn't she?" said Bundle, who was curious about the Countess. "Yes. You have heard, no doubt, of the Young Hungarian Party. The Countess is a leader in that party. A woman of great wealth, left a widow at an early age, she has devoted her money and her talents to public service. She has especially devoted herself to the problem of infant mortality, a terrible one under present conditions in Hungary. Here is her Eberhard." The German inventor was younger than Bundle had imagined him. He was probably not more than 33 or 4. He was boorish and ill at ease, and yet his personality was not an unpleasing one. His blue eyes were more shy than furtive, and his more unpleasant mannerisms, such as the one that Bill had described of gnawing his fingernails, arose, she thought, more from nervousness than from any other cause. He was thin and weedy in appearance and looked anemic and delicate. He conversed rather awkwardly with Bundle in stilted English, and they both welcomed the interruption of the joyous Mr. O'Rourke. Presently Bill bustled in, there is no other word for it. In the same such way does a favored Newfoundland make his entrance, and at once came over to Bundle. He was looking perplexed and harassed. "Hullo, Bundle. Heard you'd got here. Been kept with my nose to the grindstone all the blessed afternoon, or I'd have seen you before." "Cares of state heavy tonight," suggested O'Rourke sympathetically. Bill groaned. "I don't know what your fellow's like," he complained. "Looks a good-natured, tubby little chap. But Cotters is absolutely impossible. Drive, from morning to night. Everything you do is wrong, and everything you haven't done you ought to have done." "Quite like a quotation from the prayer book," remarked Jimmy, who had just strolled up. Bill glanced at them reproachfully. "Nobody knows," he said pathetically, "what I have to put up with." "Entertaining the Countess, suggested Jimmy. "Poor Bill, that must have been a sad strain, to a woman-hater like yourself." "What's this?" asked Bundle. "After tea," said Jimmy with a grin, "the Countess asked Bill to show her round the interesting old place." "Well, I couldn't refuse, could I?" said Bill, his countenance assuming a brick-red tint. Bundle felt faintly uneasy. She knew, only too well, the susceptibility of Mr. William Eversley to female charms. In the hands of a woman like the Countess, Bill would be as wax. She wondered once more whether Jimmy Thesiger had been wise to take Bill into their confidence. "The Countess," said Bill, "is a very charming woman. And no end intelligent. You should have seen her going round the house. All sorts of questions she asked." "What kind of questions?" asked Bundle suddenly. Bill was vague. "Oh, I don't know. About the history of it. And old furniture. And, all sorts of things." At that moment the Countess swept into the room. She seemed a shade breathless. She was looking magnificent in a close-fitting black velvet gown. Bundle noticed how Bill gravitated at once into her immediate neighborhood. The serious, spectacled young man joined him. "Bill and Pongo have both got it badly," observed Jimmy Thesiger with a laugh. Bundle was by no means so sure that it was a laughing matter. Chapter 17. After dinner. George was not a believer in modern innovations. The Abbey was innocent of anything so up-to-date as central heating. Consequently, when the ladies entered the drawing room after dinner, the temperature of the room was woefully inadequate to the needs of modern evening clothes. The fire that burnt in the well-burnished steel grate became as a magnet. The three women huddled round it. "Brrrr," said the Countess, a fine, exotic, foreign sound. "The days are drawing in," said Lady Coote, and drew a flowered atrocity of a scarf closer about her ample shoulders. "Why on earth doesn't George have the house properly heated?" said Bundle. "You English, you never heat your houses," said the Countess. She took out her long cigarette holder and began to smoke. "That grate is old-fashioned," said Lady Coote. "The heat goes up the chimney instead of into the room." "Oh," said the Countess. There was a pause. The Countess was so plainly bored by her company that conversation became difficult. "It's funny," said Lady Coote, breaking the silence, "that Mrs. McAda's children should have mumps. At least, I don't mean exactly funny." "What," said the Countess, "are mumps?" Bundle and Lady Coote started simultaneously to explain. Finally, between them, they managed it. "I suppose Hungarian children have it?" asked Lady Coote. Said the Countess. "Hungarian children. They suffer from it?" "I do not know," said the Countess. "How should I?" Lady Coote looked at her in some surprise. "But I understood that you worked." "Oh, that." The Countess uncrossed her legs, took her cigarette holder from her mouth and began to talk rapidly. "I will tell you some horrors," she said. "Horrors that I have seen. Incredible. You would not believe." And she was as good as her word. She talked fluently and with a graphic power of description. Incredible scenes of starvation and misery were painted by her for the benefit of her audience. She spoke of Budapest shortly after the war and traced its vicissitudes to the present day. She was dramatic, but she was also, to Bundle's mind, a little like a gramophone record. You turned her on, and there you were. Presently, just as suddenly, she would stop. Lady Coote was thrilled to the marrow, that much was clear. She sat with her mouth slightly open and her large, sad, dark eyes fixed on the Countess. Occasionally, she interpolated a comment of her own. "One of my cousins had 3 children burned to death. Awful, wasn't it?" The Countess paid no attention. She went on and on. And she finally stopped as suddenly as she had begun. "There," she said. "I have told you. We have money, but no organization. It is organization we need." Lady Coote sighed. "I've heard my husband say that nothing can be done without regular methods. He attributes his own success entirely to that. He declares he would have never got on without them." She sighed again. A sudden fleeting vision passed before her eyes of a Sir Oswald who had not got on in the world. A Sir Oswald who retained, in all essentials, the attributes of that cheery young man in the bicycle shop. Just for a second it occurred to her how much pleasanter life might have been for her if Sir Oswald had not had regular methods. By a quite understandable association of ideas she turned to Bundle. "Tell me, Lady Eileen," she said, "do you like that head gardener of yours?" "MacDonald?" Well, Bundle hesitated. "One couldn't exactly like MacDonald," she explained apologetically. "But he's a first-class gardener." "Oh. I know he is," said Lady Coote. "He's all right if he's kept in his place," said Bundle. "I suppose so," said Lady Coote. She looked enviously at Bundle, who appeared to approach the task of keeping MacDonald in his place so light-heartedly. "I just adore a high-toned garden," said the Countess dreamily. Bundle stared, but at that moment a diversion occurred. Jimmy Thesiger entered the room and spoke directly to her in a strange, hurried voice. "I say, will you come and see those etchings now? They're waiting for you." Bundle left the room hurriedly, Jimmy close behind her. "What etchings?" she asked, as the drawing room door closed behind her. "No etchings," said Jimmy. "I'd got to say something to get hold of you. Come on, Bill is waiting for us in the library." "There's nobody there." Bill was striding up and down the library, clearly in a very perturbed state of mind. "Look here," he burst out, "I don't like this." "Don't like what?" "You being mixed up in this. 10 to 1 there's going to be a rough house and then—" He looked at her with a kind of pathetic dismay that gave Bundle a warm and comfortable feeling. "She ought to be kept out of it, oughtn't she, Jimmy?" He appealed to the other. "I've told her so," said Jimmy. "Dash it all, Bundle, I mean, someone might get hurt." Bundle turned round to Jimmy. "How much have you told him?" "Oh, everything. I haven't got the hang of it all yet," confessed Bill. "You in that place in 7 Dials and all that." He looked at her unhappily. "I say, Bundle, I wish you wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" "Get mixed up in these sorts of things." "Why not?" said Bundle. "They're exciting." "Oh, yes, exciting. But they may be damnably dangerous. Look at poor old Ronnie." "Yes," said Bundle. "If it hadn't been for your friend Ronnie, I don't suppose I should ever have got what you call mixed up in this thing. But I am. And it's no earthly use your bleating about it. I know you're the most frightful sport, Bundle, but cut out the compliments. Let's make plans." To her relief, Bill reacted favorably to the suggestion. "You're right about the formula," he said. "Eberhard's got some sort of formula with him, or rather Sir Oswald has. The stuff has been tested out at his works, very secretly and all that. Eberhard has been down there with him. They're all in the study now, what you might call coming down to brass tacks." "How long is Sir Stanley Digby staying?" asked Jimmy. "Going back to town tomorrow." Said Jimmy. "Then one thing's quite clear. If, as I suppose, Sir Stanley will be taking the formula with him, any funny business there's going to be will be tonight." "I suppose it will." "Not a doubt of it. That narrows the thing down very comfortably. But the bright lads will have to be their very brightest. We must come down to details. First of all, where will the sacred formula be tonight? Will Eberhard have it, or Sir Oswald Coote?" "Neither. I understand it's to be handed over to the Air Minister this evening, for him to take to town tomorrow." "In that case O'Rourke will have it." "Sure to." "Well, there's only one thing for it. If we believe someone's going to have a shot at pinching that paper, we've got to keep watch tonight, Bill, my boy." Bundle opened her mouth as though to protest, but shut it again without speaking. "By the way," continued Jimmy, "did I recognize the commissionaire from Harrods in the hall this evening, or was it our old friend Lestrade from Scotland Yard?" "Scintillating, Watson," said Bill. "I suppose," said Jimmy, "that we are rather butting in on his preserves." "Can't be helped," said Bill. "Not if we mean to see this thing through." "Then it's agreed," said Jimmy. "We divide the night into 2 watches." Again Bundle opened her mouth, and again shut it without speaking. "Right you are," agreed Bill. "Who'll take first duty? Shall we spin for it?" "Might as well." "All right. Here goes. Heads you first and I second. Tails, vice versa." Bill nodded. The coin spun in the air. Jimmy bent to look at it. "Tails," he said. "Damn," said Bill. "You get first half and probably any fun that's going." "Oh, you never know," said Jimmy. "Criminals are very uncertain. What time shall I wake you?" 3:30. "That's about fair, I think." And now, at last, Bundle spoke. "What about me?" she asked. "Nothing doing. You go to bed and sleep." Oh, said Bundle. That's not very exciting. You never know, said Jimmy kindly. You may be murdered in your sleep whilst Bill and I escape scot-free. Well, there's always that possibility. Do you know, Jimmy, I don't half like the look of that countess. I suspect her. Nonsense, cried Bill hotly. She's absolutely above suspicion. How do you know? Retorted Bundle. Because I do. Why, one of the fellows at the Hungarian embassy vouched for her. Oh, said Bundle, momentarily taken aback by his fervor. You girls are all the same, grumbled Bill. Just because she's a jolly good-looking woman. Bundle was only too well acquainted with this unfair masculine line of argument. Well, don't you go and pour confidences into her shell-pink ear, she remarked. I'm going to bed. I was bored stiff in that drawing room and I'm not going back. She left the room. Bill looked at Jimmy. Good old Bundle, he said. I was afraid we might have trouble with her. You know how keen she is to be in everything. I think the way she took it was just wonderful. So did I, said Jimmy. It staggered me. She's got some sense, Bundle has. She knows when a thing's plumb impossible. I say, oughtn't we to have some lethal weapons? Chaps usually do when they're going on this sort of stunt. I have a blue-nosed automatic, said Jimmy with gentle pride. It weighs several pounds and looks most murderous. I'll lend it to you when the time comes. Bill looked at him with respect and envy. What made you think of getting that? He said. I don't know, said Jimmy carelessly. It just came to me. I hope we shan't go and shoot the wrong person, said Bill with some anxiety. That would be unfortunate, said Mr. Thesiger gravely. Chapter 18. Jimmy's Adventures. Our chronicle must here split into 3 separate and distinct portions. The night was to prove an eventful one and each of the 3 persons involved saw it from his or her own individual angle. We will begin with that pleasant and engaging youth, Mr. Jimmy Thesiger, at a moment when he has at last exchanged final goodnights with his fellow conspirator, Bill Eversley. Don't forget, said Bill, 3 a.m. If you're still alive, that is, he added kindly. I may be an ass, said Jimmy, with rancorous remembrance of the remark Bundle had repeated to him, but I'm not nearly so much of an ass as I look. That's what you said about Jerry Wade, said Bill slowly. Do you remember? And that very night he... Shut up, you damned fool, said Jimmy. Haven't you got any tact? Of course I've got tact, said Bill. I'm a budding diplomatist. All diplomatists have tact. Ah, said Jimmy. You must be still in what they call the larval stage. I can't get over Bundle, said Bill, reverting abruptly to a former topic. I should certainly have said that she'd be, well, difficult. Bundle's improved. She's improved very much. That's what your chief was saying, said Jimmy. He said he was agreeably surprised. I thought Bundle was laying it on a bit thick myself, said Bill. But Cotters is such an ass he'd swallow anything. Well, night-night. I expect you'll have a bit of a job waking me when the time comes, but stick to it. It won't be much good if you've taken a leaf out of Jerry Wade's book, said Jimmy maliciously. Bill looked at him reproachfully. What the hell do you want to go and make a chap uncomfortable for? He demanded. You're only getting your own back, said Jimmy. Toddle along. But Bill lingered. He stood uncomfortably, first on one foot and then on the other. Look here, he said. Yes. What I mean to say is, well, I mean you'll be all right and all that, won't you? It's all very well ragging, but when I think of poor old Jerry, and then poor old Ronnie. Jimmy gazed at him in exasperation. Bill was one of those who undoubtedly meant well, but the result of his efforts would not be described as heartening. I see, he remarked, that I shall have to show you Leopold. He slipped his hand into the pocket of the dark blue suit into which he had just changed and held out something for Bill's inspection. A real, genuine, blue-nosed automatic, he said with modest pride. No, I say, Bill said. Is it really? He was undoubtedly impressed. Stevens, my man, got him for me. Warranted clean and methodical in his habits. You press the button and Leopold does the rest. Oh, said Bill. I say, Jimmy. Yes. Be careful, won't you? I mean, don't go loosing that thing off at anybody. Pretty awkward if you shot old Digby walking in his sleep. That's all right, said Jimmy. Naturally, I want to get value out of Leopold now I've bought him, but I'll curb my bloodthirsty instincts as far as possible. Well, night-night, said Bill for the 14th time, and this time really did depart. Jimmy was left alone to take up his vigil. Sir Stanley Digby occupied a room at the extremity of the west wing. A bathroom adjoined it on one side, and on the other a communicating door led into a smaller room, which was tenanted by Mr. Terence O'Rourke. The doors of these 3 rooms gave on to a short corridor. The watcher had a simple task. A chair placed inconspicuously in the shadow of an oak press just where the corridor ran into the main gallery formed a perfect vantage ground. There was no other way into the west wing, and anyone going to or from it could not fail to be seen. One electric light was still on. Jimmy ensconced himself comfortably, crossed his legs and waited. Leopold lay in readiness across his knee. He glanced at his watch. It was 20 minutes to 1, just an hour since the household had retired to rest. Not a sound broke the stillness, except for the far-off ticking of a clock somewhere. Somehow or other, Jimmy did not much care for that sound. It recalled things. Gerald Wade, and those 7 ticking clocks on the mantelpiece. Whose hand had placed them there, and why? He shivered. It was a creepy business, this waiting. He didn't wonder that things happened at spiritualistic seances. Sitting in the gloom, one got all worked up, ready to start at the least sound. And unpleasant thoughts came crowding in on a fellow. Ronnie Devereux. Ronnie Devereux and Jerry Wade. Both young, both full of life and energy, ordinary, jolly, healthy young men. And now, where were they? Dank earth, worms getting them. Ugh! Why couldn't he put these horrible thoughts out of his mind? He looked again at his watch. 20 minutes past 1 only. How the time crawled. Extraordinary girl, Bundle. Fancy having the nerve and the daring actually to get into the midst of that 7 Dials place. Why hadn't he had the nerve and the initiative to think of that? He supposed because the thing was so fantastic. Number 7. Who the hell could number 7 be? Was he, perhaps, in the house at this minute? Disguised as a servant? He couldn't, surely, be one of the guests. No, that was impossible. But then, the whole thing was impossible. If he hadn't believed Bundle to be essentially truthful, well, he would have thought she had invented the whole thing. He yawned. Queer, to feel sleepy, and yet at the same time strung up. He looked again at his watch. 10 minutes to 2. Time was getting on. And then, suddenly, he held his breath and leaned forward, listening. He had heard something. The minutes went past. There it was again. The creak of a board. But it came from downstairs somewhere. There it was again. A slight, ominous creak. Somebody was moving stealthily about the house. Jimmy sprang noiselessly to his feet. He crept silently to the head of the staircase. Everything seemed perfectly quiet. Yet he was quite certain he had really heard that stealthy sound. It was not imagination. Very quietly and cautiously he crept down the staircase, Leopold clasped tightly in his right hand. Not a sound in the big hall. If he had been correct in assuming that the muffled sound came from directly beneath him, then it must have come from the library. Jimmy stole to the door of it, listened, but heard nothing. Then, suddenly flinging open the door, he switched on the lights. Nothing. The big room was flooded with light. But it was empty. Jimmy frowned. "I could have sworn," he murmured to himself. The library was a large room with 3 windows which opened onto the terrace. Jimmy strode across the room. The middle window was unlatched. He opened it and stepped out on the terrace, looking from end to end of it. Nothing. "Looks all right," he murmured to himself. And yet. He remained for a minute lost in thought. Then he stepped back into the library. Crossing to the door, he locked it and put the key in his pocket. Then he switched off the light. He stood for a minute listening, then crossed softly to the open window and stood there, Leopold ready in his hand. Was there, or was there not, a soft patter of feet along the terrace? No, his imagination. He grasped Leopold tightly and stood listening. In the distance a stable clock chimed.